Can you play Dungeons and Dragons as dark fantasy? Yeah, sure, go for it. Tabletop role playing games offer a ton of customization, and your adventure is ultimately what the players and the game master choose to make it. But if you are choosing to play out a dark fantasy story, how easy will that be in each system? Do the mechanics and the flavor present pathways leading to darker fantasy tales, or do they provide obstacles in that path? That is what I'm hoping to answer. First, we need to define dark fantasy. For that, I analyzed the elements of Dragon Age and Berserk over in this video, which I recommend you watch first. But if you only follow me for TTRPG content or you just don't care about Dragon Age, you can still watch here without some added context. The five essential ingredients of dark fantasy I am proposing are a secondary world that has lost something, elements of supernatural horror present in the setting, palpable danger for our protagonists, enough to make you feel like death and loss are possible or even likely, morally gray protagonists who struggle between choices that may not always offer a good option, and a gritty tone that emphasizes consequences and unpleasant realities within the setting. 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons can be adapted into many settings and tones, but I think most would agree with the statement in the Dungeon Master's Guide that its baseline state is heroic fantasy. Symbaroum markets itself as dark fantasy, but does a lot of things that bring it closer to heroic fantasy. To create a control group, we need to pick something that is definitively and indisputably dark. For that, I've decided to go with Mork Borg. Mork Borg is a short little RPG with a gorgeous book, and while it is quintessentially dark, I will also have the least to say about it because there just isn't as much to analyze. What you see is what you get. So, I'll go through each of my 5 criteria for dark fantasy for each of these 3 games by assigning a score from 1 to 10. If a game scores 7 or higher in a given category, it gets a big green check mark for fulfilling that category. If a game reaches all 5 check marks, it counts as viable for hosting your next dark fantasy adventure. Morkborg sets up a simple and bleak setting where almost everything is lost and the end is nigh. No one has seen the sun in years, doomsayers are proved right time and time again, civilization has been reduced to a handful of settlements, and these are corrupted and hopeless. Darkness reigns. 10 out of 10. D&D offers a lot of settings. Forgotten Realms is often seen as the default setting, but 5e has numerous settings guides, and the Dungeon Master's Guide dedicates its opening chapters to encouraging the Dungeon Master to make their own world. It is very possible to make your own dark setting in D&D, but I can't really cover your world in a video, can I? So I'm going to go with the darkest published setting, and that is Ravenloft. Ravenloft is an alternate dimension of numerous horrors where dark lords rule over demiplanes of tormented characters and soulless simulacra who have largely lost their humanity and their agency in a world designed to keep them in a cage. Looking specifically at Ravenloft and specifically at 5th edition, I'm giving this dark setting an 8 out of 10. Symbaroum offers its own setting that is intertwined with the system. The deeper you go into the story and the rules, the harder it is to separate the two. The world of Symbaroum features characters and factions that have all lost something. The barbarian clans have lost a war to the Ambrians, and their forest is being slowly corrupted. The Ambrians are victorious in the war and have conquered the plains, but they have lost their homeland of Alberator to undead hordes, and their desire to uphold the traditions they left with clashes against the new peoples and new lands they explore. We're not even going to get into the elves, goblins, and ogres, but just know that they start with a trait called pariah that says they are automatically second class citizens who will almost always be looked down on by both Ambrian and barbarian society. It's safe to say that the world of Symbaroum has lost a lot, and the darkness of Davokar threatens to create more loss as the corruption grows. It's not as supernatural as Ravenloft or as apocalyptic as Morkborg, but I'm going with a healthy 7 out of 10. All 3 settings include monsters and villainous NPCs. These monsters and NPCs often have a magical or extraplanar origin. But how horrifying are they? Morkborg offers a short smattering of monsters with iconic inspiration that can and will kill your characters. The world itself is oppressive, mystical, and no longer fit for human survival. it's another 10 out of 10. D&D offers a ton of monsters you can use in your Ravenloft game. There are demons, devils, and undead, as well as whatever NPCs you can come up with as a DM. Parsing through all of the monsters and possibilities can be tricky because there are also things like Happy Eladrin, Trixie Nilbogs, actual angels, and flumps, just flumps. But because the imagery and descriptions lean into familiar tropes, I think it's going to be very easy for your DM to pick out which monsters actually play off of horror ideas. The Dungeon Master's Guide includes rules for madness, diseases, and traps that could make the environment as frightening as the monsters that inhabit them. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft dedicates a section to describing different kinds of horrors, how to properly run horror and evoke a dreadful atmosphere, and includes safety tools, which I'm a fan of, but is a contentious factor for many players. There is horror to be found in D&D, but it can never reach the darkest depths of Mork Borg. You have to sift through all of D&D's heroic and high fantasy elements to find something that works. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Symbaroum's monsters and villainous NPCs are not near as varied or numerous as D&D. Any one that you pick plays off of some trope of horror, even if it's just the marauding bandit that sets upon innocent travelers. The magic of the world is presented as universally corrupting. Even if you are casting a healing spell, you are inviting something dark to touch your soul. The darkest parts of Davokar and the ruins within are presented as mysterious and deadly. Few who enter ever leave. Within Ambrian cities, there are the machinations of nobles and factions whose schemes are just as likely to get you killed as something in the dark forest. This gets an 8 out of 10. All three of these role playing games come with built in dangers. Combat is a major section of each game, and it is possible for your character to lose all their hit points and die. But how likely is that to happen? Mork Borg has you randomly roll up condensed characters who are essentially meant to die within 1 or 2 sessions. They can fight back against the dangers presented and pull off some incredible and metal moves, but they are very likely to meet their end in a brutal and heartless fashion. 9 out of 10. D&D has you make a heroic character starting at level 1. I use the word heroic because even if you are playing an evil character, your character will be a capable and dangerous agent of evil beyond the average minion. That is an intentional part of 5e's design. Your first level character is just built different than the NPCs around them. You get to choose from a wide array of possible abilities and spells that will continue to set you apart as you embark on your journey of survival and become more powerful. Characters in 5e are more detailed in creation than something like Morkborg, and this design choice discourages DMs from killing them because players have to invest more into their characters, and all that setup comes with the expectation of satisfying payoff. This design difference finally manifests itself in hit points and death saves. While there are indeed some low level monsters that have the potential to one shot a squishy PC with some really good dice rolls, by the time characters reach level 3, there are a ton of ways to keep yourself and your allies alive. Creating actual palpable danger for the party requires an active effort by the DM to make deadly encounters, target characters' vulnerabilities, and employ tactics that many D&D fans will condemn as being too adversarial. There are also variant rules you can employ like stress, gritty realism rests, and massive damage to decrease the chances of survival, but these are all extra measures far beyond the scope of what the baseline rules as written present. The potential for danger in your D&D game is absolutely possible, but it's going to take a lot to get there. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Symbaroum's characters fall somewhere in complexity between the other two games. You're not randomly rolling a mook to be sent into a meat grinder, but you're also not required to develop personality traits and ideals for your folk hero farm boy that now wields a longsword as well as any trained soldier or town guard. Characters maintain a heroic air of talent, and their abilities can be amazing, but their limited role within the larger world of Symbaroum's factions is stifling. While combat in D&D is made to run at least 3 rounds, and at higher levels both PCs and monsters have bloated health pools that make taking them down a Herculean task of persistence, Symbaroum characters are often meant to go down in a handful of successful hits. Once a character goes down, there is a similar mechanic to D&D's death save system, but healing back up is considerably more difficult, with characters only regaining 1 toughness per day, as opposed to D&D giving back all your hit points with a long rest. If you're playing a mystic, you're in constant danger of losing yourself to corruption, meaning that party members traveling with a mystic always have to be wary of them turning into a deadly abomination. Not everything in Symbaroum is trying to kill you, like in Mork Borg, but when something decides it wants you dead, you're far more likely to die than you are in 5e. I'm giving Symbaroum an 8 out of 10. In a role playing game, the protagonist is the player, usually alongside their party of other players. You are able to make whatever decisions your game master is willing to facilitate. But how far does each game move the boundaries that allow you to venture into good and evil choices? Mork Borg's characters always have dastardly traits and dubious origins. Your goal is survival into the next day by whatever means necessary, society and morality be damned. Or rather, society and morality have already been damned because this world is ending and nothing matters. If anything, I might say that your Mork Borg character is more likely to be outright evil than morally gray, although you are still finding some reason to fight against the darker things of this world. 9 out of 10. D&D's primary approach to your character's morality is of course the famous and notorious alignment system. You can quickly arbitrate that your character is indeed morally gray by selecting a neutral alignment, or just evil by selecting an evil one. What matters more is how you actually play your character and make decisions within the game's scenarios. And to that end, 5e offers more specific terms like ideals and flaws. While most parties work together, it is also possible to engage in PvP. And even if that isn't allowed at your table, there are plenty of time honored traditions like your rogue pickpocketing more than your fair share of loot, or your bard seducing whatever helpful or even villainous NPCs they come across. However, the aspects of heroic fantasy often cast a blinding light over whatever scenarios your DM presents. Ravenloft is a dark and doomed setting, but your characters will pretty much always stand in opposition to the Dark Lords ruling over the realm because there is no drama and no conflict to be found in serving the Dark Lords who already have an established reign over their subjects. While it is very possible to have individual alignments of neutral or even evil, the overall role of the party in any D&D adventure inevitably tends towards good or the self-serving side of neutrality because they will fight monsters, they will recover MacGuffins, and they will change the world to better fit their ideals. It is very possible to create a morally gray character in D&D, but the system largely encourages you to play out characters that make choices for good. I am giving this one a 6 out of 10. Symbaroum's answer to alignment mostly comes in the form of your personal goal. There is no judgment label placed on your goal. You simply state, I will be the greatest swordsman in all of the land, or I will bag back my family's farm by any means necessary, and you venture forth. This is further layered with your party's group goal, which will come about as a result of finding common ground with your personal goals and determining a path to mutual gain. Like D&D and even Mork Borg, the monsters that you fight are usually going to be the most evil things in the setting, which does make you heroic by comparison, as your endeavors will cross paths with them and you will probably defeat them. But the system of personal goals, the conflicting factions, and the pervading motif that this is an age of exploration and you are essentially a grave robber all contribute to the greater likelihood that your Symbaroum character will have motives that are ulterior and self-serving. The factions of Symbaroum all perform morally dubious acts to extend their reach, and your characters will inevitably be caught up in the power struggle whether you explicitly represent them or are being courted by them. This is all possible in D&D, but in Symbaroum it is the default. 7 out of 10. Tone is going to be the hardest value to quantify and the easiest for you and your party to change based on how you approach and play your game. To determine if a game has a foundation in gritty tone, we are going to look at how each game presents its art and its flavor text. Mork Borg is basically all about tone. If I have a complaint about Mork Borg, it's that the game is almost entirely style with little to go off of in substance. But that style is kind of the whole point. The shocking art and the grimy quotes serve to create an entirely different atmosphere for a short and memorable role playing adventure. There's nothing else to give this but an 11 out of 10. D&D's tone is not as dark, by a long shot. Even if we're just looking at the Ravenloft book, the art is much more modern and bright, and still finds excuses to insert humor and heroic framing. There are countless stories about DMs or entire groups who sit down to play out a serious and gritty adventure that winds up descending into a good natured action comedy because of how the dice land and how 5e's abilities are designed to get you out of trouble quickly. There's also the fact that the memes are inescapable. The church cop paladin, the klepto rogue, the horny bard, the dumb barbarian, and more are all archetypes your character can fall into despite your best efforts because the abilities presented to that character serve that archetype and the culture surrounding D&D can overshadow whatever specific story your DM is trying to achieve. Tables will vary, but your average D&D player in 2025 is less likely to draw upon the cool pulp novel they finished last week and more likely to draw on whatever happened last episode in Critical Role or Delicious in Dungeon. And please don't take that as a judgment over what art or what flavor is better or worse. For the record, I adore Delicious in Dungeon, but tone is tone, and 5e D&D's is neither dark nor gritty. 4 out of 10. Symbaroum presents its world as grounded and enigmatic. Even the character portraits carry an air of the unknown, in part because it's possible to imprint multiple interpretations on a given being, and in part because this book implies your party will have more masks than Slipknot. Magic has consequences, martial attacks are deadly, and utility powers provide temporary solutions but rarely sweep aside the problem entirely. Symbaroum benefits from not being nearly as popular as D&D, meaning the system and the setting get to shine based on what is presented in the text rather than being bogged down by expectations and traditions. The writing of its one specific world is allowed to stand on its own, and that world is filled with consequence and conflict. I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. So, Mork Borg gets full marks and an average score of 9.8 out of 10 on my dark fantasy scale. Symbaroum's actual play might not be as dark and gritty as it is advertised and assumed to be, with a passable average score of 7.6, but it still hits all the marks, and I think it's safe to call it a foundation for dark fantasy adventures. 5e D&D, using the Ravenloft setting, is darker than a lot of naysayers would give it credit with a score of 6 out of 10, but it still misses the mark in danger, great protagonists, and tone. That is not to say that it is impossible to tell a dark fantasy story while playing D&D with your friends. More than the other two systems, D&D offers a wealth of modular content and possibilities, and there are plenty of examples out there of successful dark fantasy D&D games, possibly including the Berserk D&D adventure I ran and cataloged on this channel. But it takes work. It takes adding in as many challenging variant rules and dark personal touches as your dungeon master can to evoke the right setting, monsters, and danger level, and then it requires every single player to be on board for following through on tone and morally gray decision making. It won't be an easy task, but know that I am on your side and I wish you luck. That's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. Trying to interpret genres across multiple systems is bound to be contentious, especially adding in scores on those aspects. I am just one man, and for all my proclaimed true sight, I have my blind spots. I look forward to seeing the discussion in the comments and hearing the scores you would bump up or knock down. Have a nat 20 day. Bye bye.